Hello, Gene Schwimmer here. Welcome to today's vlog. Before we get into today's subject, I just want to touch briefly on one of my favorite subjects of every day, not just today, and that's grilling and barbecue. But today, grilling, I just had to bring this up because, well, if you've been watching this vlog for a while, you know that I lived in New York for about 40 years until January. I lived in Manhattan, New York City. I moved to, now I'm in Cordova, Tennessee, as of a month ago. I moved to Germantown, Tennessee back in January. But I'm originally from Michigan, born in Detroit, Michigan, which you also know already if you've been watching these vlogs. One of the things that I miss the most from Michigan, all the years I've been in Manhattan, has been grilling and barbecuing, having a backyard in which to fire up a grill and grill a steak or chicken or anything. Just cook outdoors over a fire. Now I can, that I'm in Tennessee. So today for the first time I hooked up, well, I bought a smoker a little while ago. I just got delivery yesterday, so I'm seasoning a smoker. So I'm going to smoke myself a brisket. But today I have a little portable grill that I bought, and I used it for the first time today. I made jerk chicken. It was delicious. Boy, what a difference. In fact, I thought the chicken wasn't done because it cooked so fast, nice crispy skin, but when I cut into it, moist, juicy. If you're living in Manhattan, what can I say? That's a reason to move right there, just to be able to grill. It was so good. I can't wait to do it again. I just had to share that with all my friendly, faithful followers. If you have a grill, you know what I mean. And today I want to, well, usually I talk about a current event. In fact, so current that sometimes I'll wake up in the morning with a subject in mind that I want to talk to, and then something will happen during that day that will make me put that subject that I had planned only a few hours before on the back burner and talk about something else. But today I want to talk about something that's been on my mind for a while, been meaning to get around to it. It came up again today, so I'm going to talk about it. It's this constant reference to this supposedly stolen Supreme Court nomination. Of course, I mean Merrick Garland, whom Barack Obama nominated in his very last year of his presidency. Mitch McConnell did not give him a hearing, and you could have heard the Democrats all the way from New York, where I used to live, to Tennessee and back again. That's how mad they were, and they still keep bringing this up. And well, we also branch off now into one of my other favorite subjects, recurring subjects, which is press bias, because this whole Merrick Garland brouhaha is nonsense. It's just partisan nonsense. If somebody had done, well, somebody did. One writer, and to my knowledge, only one writer, this would be Dan McLaughlin, writing for or in National Review, at least on the website. Don't know if it appeared in the magazine, this article. But he was the only one to do what one would think any journalist, any honest, competent journalist would do, which is to go back and check the historical record. The very first thing, the very first day that Mitch McConnell announced that he was not going to give Merrick Garland a hearing, reporters should have gone back and checked to see, has this ever happened before? In other words, and definitely once the Democrats started complaining. Unless, of course, you're what one of my favorite bloggers, Glenn Reynolds, calls Democratic operatives with bylines. That's his name for journalists, for liberal journalists, because they pretend to be objective journalists, but they're really Democratic operatives with bylines. So they don't do what I suggested any competent journalist should do, and that's check the historical record, because they want to keep this narrative alive, because they want to help the Democrats to win elections. It's very simple, and to get liberal justices on the Supreme Court. So when I say go back and check the historical record, what am I talking about? What did Dan McLaughlin of the National Review do what these other reporters, so-called reporters, did not do? And that is to go back and check the obvious question of whether there has been any instance in the past when a Supreme Court vacancy has occurred in a presidential election year when you had the Senate controlled by one party and the president was of another party. Has this ever happened before? And if it has happened, what were the results? What happened in that instance? It turns out that there were 10. And here's what Dan McLaughlin found, that the other reporters didn't even bother to check. There have been 10 times in our history when a Supreme Court vacancy occurred in a presidential election year when the president was of one party and the Senate was controlled by another party. 10 times this happened. How many times of those 10 times was the nominee confirmed in that election year? Turns out once. One time out of all 10 times when there has been a vacancy on the Supreme Court bench when you had a president of one party and a Senate controlled by the other party. In only one instance was the nominee confirmed. And not only that, but I forget whether it's 5 or 6, but half of those instances, the nominee did not even get a hearing. So this whole business about Merrick Garland not getting a hearing, about this being unprecedented, it's not unprecedented. It's what usually happens. What has happened 9 times, well, I guess we can say 10 times out of 11 now, if we include Merrick Garland, but before that, 9 times out of 10. It's just common sense. If you have a vacancy in a presidential election year and you have 2 different parties controlling the White House and the Senate, if you're running the Senate, you're obviously going to try to run out the clock. Now, if there are 2 years left, then you can't do that. It's just not practical. The public would not stand for it. But if you're talking about a presidential election year when you have only a few months before the election, then, well, as I said, 9 times out of 10, that's what the Senate has done. So Democrats, you can scream and squawk and wail and gnash your teeth all you want, but that's what usually happens, and it's really another reason to be disgusted if you're a conservative with the media, because nobody except this one reporter for the National Review, which is a conservative website, has bothered to check and corrected the record. Even though it was 3 years ago, 2016, when Obama nominated Garland for the Supreme Court, 3 years later, the Democrats continue to bring this up and nobody corrects the record. So again, stop complaining, Democrats, number one. Number two, liberal reporters, try doing your job for a change. You might find it refreshing. I know we would, or at least we conservatives would find it refreshing if you would just check the historical record and not let these Democrats get away with these narratives that they create for political expediency. I won't hold my breath waiting for that to happen, but wouldn't it be nice if it did? Okay, so now we've gone back, looked at the historical record. Now let's look at another reason why the Democrats really have no cause to complain. So I'm going to talk now about Judge Ginsburg. And I said Judge Ginsburg, so I'm not talking about this Ginsburg, the one on the Supreme Court, Justice Ginsburg. I'm talking about this Ginsburg, Douglas Ginsburg, whom Ronald Reagan nominated in 1987 for the Supreme Court. This was a situation where, and it was not a presidential election year, by the way. It was not a presidential election year, and you had the Senate controlled by the Democrats, and you had obviously a Republican president, Reagan. He nominated Douglas. Well, let's not even get to Douglas Ginsburg until we talk about first Robert Bork, another, well, he got a hearing, but I mean, if we're talking about the president is entitled to his pick, which is what they were saying about Garland. They're saying the president, Obama, was entitled to his pick. So why was Reagan not entitled to Robert Bork? As we all know, that was, well, at least those of us who were old enough to have been around at that time and watched the hearings, or those of us who have read about it, but those were very nasty hearings. In fact, there's a verb for it. I'm sure a lot of you have heard it, borking. borking, to attack somebody personally, to keep them from being appointed to a high office. That's from Robert Bork, from the way they treated him. That's how badly they treated him. After Bork was defeated, the next nominee was Douglas Ginsburg. He did not even get a hearing. The Democrats were dead set against him too. The whole issue was the same one as today, only the Republicans finally succeeded today, but at that time, the same issue was the makeup of the court, shifting the court from a liberal majority to a conservative majority. That's what would have happened had Bork been appointed. That's what would have happened had Douglas Ginsburg been appointed. So the Democrats were dead set against that happening. It turned out that Douglas Ginsburg, he had smoked marijuana many years ago. The Democrats made a big deal out of that, which at that time, I mean, maybe today it wouldn't be such an issue, but at that time, yeah, I could see how it was a bigger issue at that time, because I remember I was living through that time. But I can also say with absolute confidence that had we been talking instead about a liberal Democratic nominee nominated by a Democratic president, that the attitude of Democrats about this past marijuana use would not have been the same. And I could also say, to be fair, that probably the Republicans would have reacted differently too. That's just the kind of politicized era that we live in with Supreme Court nominations. The point is, not only did Reagan's nominee, the nominee that supposedly the president is entitled to, not get confirmed by the Senate, he did not even get a hearing, just like Merrick Garland did not get a hearing. And this was not a presidential election year. So after Douglas Ginsburg, then Anthony Kennedy was the next nominee, and he did get confirmed. But you can see how far Reagan had to move from the nominee that he originally wanted, Robert Bork, how far to the left he had to move towards Anthony Kennedy, who I guess you could call him a centrist, but we've had rulings on gay marriage and abortion that we would not have gotten from a Robert Bork. So Reagan did not get the nominee that he was entitled to. So that's another reason Democrats stopped complaining about Merrick Garland. And press, do your job and explain to the public why the Democrats have no cause to complain. I would also mention the obvious Clarence Thomas. He got confirmed and he got a hearing, but he barely got confirmed, and that was a very nasty hearing too. I would rank it right, well, he called it a high-tech lynching, and that's exactly what it was. And he barely got through. Let me see, look at my notes here. You see, I barely read. You got to bear with me while I try to read my notes. I can't even read my own handwriting half the time. Oh, Samuel Alito. That's a more recent nomination. When George Bush nominated, before we get to Alito, let's remember Harriet Miers. That was another nominee that not only did not get confirmed, did not even get a hearing. As Douglas Ginsburg did, Harriet Miers, well, this was, in fairness to the Democrats, it was mainly protests from Republicans, especially conservative Republicans, because they did not know enough about Harriet Miers because she did not have a substantial enough record for them to be confident that she would be a conservative justice. So she was pressured into withdrawing her nomination. So that's Harriet Miers. But getting back to Samuel Alito, whom I was about to discuss when I remembered Harriet Miers. So I talked about Harriet Miers, now on to Samuel Alito. Alito did get a hearing. He was confirmed, but 91% of the Democrats in the Senate voted against his nomination. So again, what's this business about the president is entitled to his pick? And for the sake of argument, im arguendo, as the lawyers say, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that Merrick Garland did get a hearing. He would not have been confirmed in a Republican-controlled Senate. No way, no how. So McConnell, at the end of the day, saved Merrick Garland some embarrassment, because you would have, well, you had the precedent. You had 91% of Democrats voting against Samuel Alito. So what's wrong with 91% of Republicans voting against Merrick Garland? The hearing, had it occurred, would have been just a useless exercise, would have been for nothing. But let's go back to 1987 and Ronald Reagan and his nominee, Robert Bork, and his nominee, Douglas Ginsburg, and his nominee, Anthony Kennedy. In other words, Ronald Reagan in 1987 had to submit 3 nominees before he was able to get a justice confirmed by the Senate, at that time controlled by Democrats. The question that pops into my head is, if it was good enough for the Republican Ronald Reagan, why would it not have been good enough for the Democrat Barack Obama? He could just do what Reagan did and move further to the right and just submit additional nominations. And in fact, as most of us know, I would say actually by now almost all of us should know, because this was a specific promise that Donald Trump made repeatedly during the 2016 campaign. Trump has been choosing his Supreme Court nominees, and nominees for lower courts too, from a list given to him by the Federalist Society. Well, that same list that was available to Donald Trump, it was available to Barack Obama too. And I don't recall reading any stories about somebody holding a gun to then President Obama's head and saying, President Obama, you cannot nominate anybody on the Federalist Society list. So if it was so important to fill Antonin Scalia's seat that year, 2016, I'm sure a nominee from the Federalist Society would have sailed through Mitch McConnell's Senate. That option was always there for Barack Obama. Obviously, it would be a cold day in hell before Barack Obama would appoint a nominee from the Federalist Society list. But the option was there. Technically, the option was there. But let's be honest, it's all about, as it was during the Bork nomination, as it was during the Clarence Thomas nomination, as it was in the Gorsuch nomination and the Kavanaugh nomination and the next one to come up. For Democrats, it's all about preventing a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. That's all it is, and that's all it is for me today. As usual, thank you for stopping by, for watching this vlog. Thumbs up if you liked the video. Let the whole world, and YouTube especially, know that you liked the video. Thumbs up there. If you have any comments, there's a comment section below the video. If you have a suggestion for a topic you would like me to cover, you can put that in there too. If you have a Twitter account, you could tweet the URL to this video or other videos or the whole darn channel. And finally, you can subscribe, and then you would know the instant I post a new video. I hope you'll be here for the next one. I'll be here for you. See you soon. Bye.